Hello, Papers Podcast listeners, and welcome to another episode. We are so excited to have you here with us today as we take on yet another manuscript in hopes of helping you make sense of the work that you do every day. To help us along with this process, we have the usual cast of characters. Hi, Linda.
Hi, Dee.
And we have John.
Hey, Lara. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Jason, you selected a paper, and I'm looking forward to our conversation because I highlighted a whole bunch of things.
You should be looking forward to this because this is a great paper. This is a really, really great paper. It's novel, it's interesting, it's delicious, it's low calorie, it's highly nutritious.
And I'm sure you're going to tell us it's the paper of the year because you always do this, Jason, even if it isn't.
I can't help it if I find papers of the year. It's just part of the process. So listen, I have a question for all of you, and I'll have to adapt it a little bit for Lava's practice. So when you were training, when you were en route to your profession, did you notice that some of your supervisors had approached the same problems differently? And what did you attribute that to? I'm going to go with John, Linda, Lara.
I think it depends where you are in the training. When you are very early in training, you assume a very black and white phenomenon, and that's where algorithms work really well. The literature is very clear that experts never use algorithm. I think Gary Klein would be somebody who would be leading that literature around what expertise looks like in practice amongst a variety of professions. And so as an intern, I thought there's only one way to solve this problem. There is one source of truth. The world is black and white. The answer is X. And when someone didn't do X, I was like, oh my God, what is happening here? Is my world fragmenting? And then as you become more and more experienced, you realize, you know what? It's all shades of gray. And if you have enough insight in that kind of meta oversight of your own learning, you say, okay, I see this part of practice from supervisor X, which I want to emulate, and from supervisor Y that I want to integrate, and from supervisor Z that I never want to do. And you realize how you can tackle the nuance of stuff. As a teacher, when I have those conversations now, it's really important to help them understand that, stop being so rigid. Understand the nuance of this individual who has a whole context and background in a unique position about how disease is intersecting with their health in the broadest sense.
I agree that there is a variation. If I look at my trainees, the very novice ones are saying, what do I do? Tell me what I should do. Next one's up are saying, tell me some guidelines. The next one's up, usually senior residents just going to do their exams are saying, here's the guidelines, this is the way to do it. And then in practice, of course, there are those nuances. That reminds me, John, what you said about some of the KT framework, the knowledge translation frameworks, where there's the patient, the evidence, and I think it's the doctor, which is the third part, but all of them have input, which is why evidence, which is only one part of it, gives you the rigidity, and the other two allow that flexibility and that variability.
Lara, does this resonate with you?
No, unfortunately, it really doesn't, because in my PhD training, even in my master's or undergraduate training in the arts and humanities, you very quickly give up the idea that there's a one right answer. So, for instance, in my PhD class, there was someone in the cohort who was doing the rhetoric of cereal boxes. And once you start realizing that somebody can disentangle the arguments of the social construction of a cereal box, you're like, sometimes a Wheaties just a Wheatie, right?
Did they ever get employed?
I have no idea. But the one thing I do want to point out, though, the interesting part about variation that I thought was interesting is that when my son was learning some mathematical stuff in elementary school, they were talking about all the different approaches he could use to get to the right answer. And that kind of variability I could get behind because they were presenting different approaches, and whichever one works for you, dear child, you can use. And it was great because he would use his approach. It wasn't the one I was using. So we would do homework together and he would teach me his approach. And it was, so I can get behind variability in education on that side.
Okay, cool. So let me set up this topic. This is about clinical supervisor variability. And I want to set it up as, is variability in practice bad, or is it bad all the time? Early in the patient safety movement over the last 20 years, practice variation was identified as perhaps the biggest threat to patient safety. And it was something that needed to be addressed by all of us who are so dedicated to making care better. And I think some of the themes that just came out in the last few minutes about how different levels of trainee might see things like variability different is really apropos. From my own experience, when you're a medical student, you look up at every teacher as a god and you think, wow, every word they say is true and it's exactly the way that all teachers must do things. That's not true. And when you're a junior trainee, you start to learn some basic facts, and it's kind of a cookbook, and you're startled that some supervisors have different cookbooks or they don't follow the cookbook. And then you start to make attributions, and I'm a little bit sheepish to say that we used to think that some supervisors were better doctors because they did things a certain way. But when you're a senior trainee or in practice, you're suddenly humbled to realize that there are so many nuances with every patient that you can't follow guidelines to a letter. It's never black and white. And in fact, there's so many factors. It takes a really experienced clinician to know when not to do something or when to do something. I hope that resonates with all of you who are listening. So enter these authors. So this is Mithunwani et al. This is from Johns University. It's still a good paper. I'm just kidding, John. Do you know these authors?
Yeah, Siraj is awesome. He's a great educator. Mickey Zeller, who's also on the paper, is a great educator. Eric Sang as well. So I'm excited to see what they're doing. And these are true clinician educators that are not sitting in ivory towers wondering about how to get grants, but how can we make the educational experience better for learners? And so I love this kind of stuff.
Fantastic. So we're recording in March 2024, and this paper is from the March 2024 issue of Academic Medicine. The title of the paper is Learning from Clinical Supervisor Practice Variability, Exploring Medical Resident and Fellow Experiences and Interpretations. I looked at this and I thought, variability is an interesting topic. When I got into it, I actually thought this was a really good paper. I thought it was very clever. So they set out to explore how medical residents and fellows experience and interpret inter-supervisor clinical practice variability and how these variations influence learning. So very cool. And they introduced the fact to me, at least to me, that there's a body of literature on this topic. Okay, so let's do a little bit of methods and then I want your input. So clinical practice variability had a definition here. It was operationalized as two or more clinicians making different treatment decisions despite encountering a similar case. I was kind of struck by that definition that they focused on treatment only, because there's other kinds of practice variability, like lots of other aspects of what we do. I would make it more general. I would say approaching the same problems and doing different work things, more than treatment. I'm seeing some nods. Linda's nodding. Linda's got her fourth different hat on. John's fighting that though. Go, John.
I'm going to disagree just for a second, Jason, which is you want to narrow down the area of investigation. And so thrombosis works really well for this. It's the question of which type of drug are you going to give for this type of condition, which in the alternate universe is there's only one correct answer, and they want to make the argument that variability is important. So they're trying to heighten, I think, that contrast of what does variation look like. If you get into everything, then you kind of end up with a muddy, messy piece. I think being very restrictive here in the guardrails of the phenomenon, I think adds to the richness of what their findings might be. So I disagree with your critique.
So I'm just going to add that I think they had to go with a narrow focus because of the theory they chose, but we'll come back to that.
Okay, let's come back to that in a moment in just like 2 seconds. So I'm totally good with them narrowing their focus in order to do a good study. I quibble with the definition. I think it's way too restrictive. Okay, so what they do, the authors took a constructivist stance, they said, with this work, and conducted semi-structured interviews of senior trainees. So this is postgraduate year 3 and above. They said, we're going to talk to internal medicine, hematology, and thrombosis trainees. And they did it during the COVID epidemic. They justify this population because of something John just said, which is thrombosis as a characteristic they pitched to all of us has extensive evidence from studies that helps us guide and make treatment decisions. And they tend to see a lot of patients with some of the similar problems over and over and over again. So it allows a conversation about interpractice variability. Participants were recruited purposively, John, All participants got $15 Canadian as an incentive. That's for the US people listening, that's about 50 cents US. And so it was kind of symbolic, maybe they framed it. The first author who knew and worked with these trainees conducted all the interviews. I'm really curious in a second what you think about that. The author said they use constructivist grounded theories. This is another CGT paper. We do a lot of those. They said it's CGT because they did concurrent and iterative data collection and analysis. They said member checking was optional, which was interesting. They used variation theory to guide interview design and analysis. The authors provided a reflexivity statement, and they continued until sufficiency. Sorry, I almost said that wrong. Sufficiency was reached. I almost said it like it's purposively. And just before I opened the floor, I saw a little word about variation theory, which I thought was a really cool thing. I went and looked up some papers. It asserts that learning is made up of dimensions of variation that learners must navigate. This really reminded me of expertise theory. That the more novice you are, the fewer key features you recognize. And the more masterful you are in a domain, the more that you see nuance and you understand it. So learners must experience at least 3 patterns of variation: contrast, generalization, and fusion. I read in one of the references that someone else throws in separation. And the idea for each of these patterns that they need to recognize is looking at a case, figuring out what the key features are that vary, trying to figure out what was different in this case that the attending did, trying to figure out what they could generalize to other future cases, and then really recognizing nuance in every case. So it's for me, it's kind of an expertise scale. They did, and I like this quote from one of the references. Martin et al. Described this as powerful ways of acting derived from powerful ways of seeing. Dun, dun, dun. Doesn't that sound cool? So I'm just going to open the floor. Linda, John, Lara, what say you about these methods?
I didn't know anything about the theory beforehand, so it's nice to see that they did use a theory, this variation theory. I'll defer to Lara about the constructivist grounded theory approach. They seem to be missing a few steps in it. On the other hand, given the question they asked, I don't see any major problems with anything here.
I think I'm going to have to talk myself into clarity here. The state that they want to create theory about how learners use variation to learn. And their theory at the end, I'm going to have my typical complaint about the nuance, but also the clarity of their figure in terms of explaining their overarching final theory. I wonder if using CGT would have been more helpful if they answered the question about what is the experience of seeing variation in practice about how you learn, rather than trying to do that. What I think might lend itself much more to experimental type approaches to say, what is the actual process of learning, and taking a cognitive psychology point of view and seeing how to apply it. It's like they've walked that line, and it's kind of blurry as to what really the output is. And using a constructivist approach to speak to the process of learning, I'm not sure if that lines up as well as talk to us about what the experience is like, how variation is encountered and processed, rather than what is happening at a subconscious level about how you actually code and retrieve knowledge. So I just wonder if there's a misalignment in what they want, and the theory that ends at the end is like, oh, okay.
So I had several of the same problems. In terms of, first, just to touch on Linda's comment about CGT, about the constructivist grounded theory, I have absolutely no problem with their use of it. They made some changes to it, though, that then gave me some cause for pause. So, for instance, usually in CGT, we use open, then axial, then theoretical coding. And instead, these authors did literal coding, which comes from Saldana, which is a different tradition. So I'm just wondering why you wouldn't use the CGT structures. Like, why switch? They also talked about getting this member checking data, but then they never tell us what they did with it. So what if they didn't agree with you, or did everybody agree with you? Just pieces there are missing for me. What really gave me cause for pause, though, was the theory, because the theory talks about the sequential pattern of contrast, then generalization, then fusion. So you're supposed to go, the idea is the theory says you go through these things in this order. And I think what I find really problematic is that it requires a certain level of control or a certain pace or similarity across different cases and different instances. So I too did some reading around the theory, and the theory actually makes sense when you think about it. It comes from, for instance, mathematics training or classroom context education, where you can give a learner one thing and then show them variations on that pattern, one element at a time. But when you bring that same way of thinking, this theory, to context-dependent learning like HPE, I wonder for how long you can hold on to that idea of sequential process and development. So I don't want to suggest by any means that you can't use it. I think you can. I think it would be, this is probably where my lack of clinical training shows up. It might be very appropriate for this context, because they might be able to have that kind of variability control. I just don't know how it would translate, say, to internal medicine.
John?
But can I just say, though, this is a ed psych theory, right? Developed on rats and undergrad psych students, which I'm not sure
rats.
I'm not sure if probably rats, honestly.
What
That's
would
where
rat
a lot of this ed psych,
do? Rat would say...
I will go find an ed psych paper with rats on variation theory.
Cheese, not cheese.
Nope.
Maybe cheese.
No, different kinds of cheese.
Exactly.
Anyway, my point is...
he's got a point. Hold on.
They're using a theory, but then they're using it to provide kind of the guardrails as to how they understand their process. We do that all the time. We take cog psych stuff, we take sociology, and it's never a perfect one-to-one translation. So I think, yeah, you're right. It is a very brittle framework, or a very brittle theory if it's applied directly into the contextual learning of HPE. But it is an explanation for how our working memory and our long-term memory or categorizes and organizes and makes distinction. So it's okay. It's just, we do this all the time when we apply theories.
So I'm just I don't know if you all heard that pop. Did you hear the pop? That was the sound of me about to bust John's bubble. Because as I said, I don't have a problem with the theory. My question is how useful and how useful will it be across different contexts?
Okay. All right. Linda?
Yeah, I think it will be useful. Maybe we can get to it a bit later, but I can see using this in teaching people at various levels. This is what I think for the junior learner. You may hear otherwise. That's not to say either right or wrong. For the more senior person, asking them about how they came up with their conclusions based on the variation that they've seen, and actually getting the learners to reflect on both this theory and some of the findings in this paper.
I also want to say, as a clinician, this completely resonated with me. Albeit that thrombosis has this kind of unique setup where they have a smaller number of phenomena, and then they have sort of patient variation. So there's a clot somewhere, and what do we do with that clot? And for this patient, where their clot is, but it really resonates. I have like really novice learners who just want to know what to do, like Linda said, and I have really senior learners who say, walk me through why you arrived at that, like why that choice in this, for this patient, for this context. And that's kind of what variation theory seems to describe. That's the latter one, is fusion. But let's see what they did and see if listeners buy it. Okay, so they did these interviews. They interviewed 17 trainees at the end of the day. All participants said, yep, for sure, I experience inter-supervisor clinical practice variability. There were some themes they identified about where variability comes from, or kind of the attributions that the learners discussed. Learners highlighted areas where it's about the patient, because they present with something rare for which there's little evidence to guide practice. There's variability that comes from a process issue, like I'm handing over a patient, a different attending might do the same problem a little differently. And then there's some attributions to characteristics of their preceptors. So supervisors have different training, different backgrounds, different risk tolerance. That's a big one in my lived experience as an emergency physician. Research expertise, I wasn't totally sure what that one meant. If you research thrombosis, do you do things differently? Are you more cutting edge? Scope of practice, willingness to deviate from medical evidence. That's like maybe how courageous you are or how reckless you are. I wasn't sure. Interpretation of and awareness of evidence was also something that they attributed to preceptors. And finally, they said other participants in care decisions also influence what we did. So families, patient preferences, goals of care, and the learners themselves. They talked about how they present or how they keyed on a key feature might influence our choice for a given case. So I thought all of those attributions about where variability came from was pretty interesting. And then I'll just finish up with their second part of the results, which was their impact on learning. So they said impact on learning included sort of three big themes. Cues from supervisors help trainees recognize key features in a case that might have been overlooked. So that kind of maps to the contrast aspect of variability theory. Knowing key features help trainees recognize other patients that principles might apply to. So that's like the generalizability or generalization of variability theory. And then the fusion part of variability theory sort of manifested as trainees with more experience noted they later realized that decision-making is more nuanced. All those kinds of quotes. So the authors concluded that, this variability theory is really relevant to at least to thrombosis practice, that it's part of trainees' lived experiences. And they said, actually, we should learn from this. We should ensure that trainees are exposed to variability. We should ensure trainees have the skills, the learning skills to explore variability and integrate it into their thinking. And finally, we should ensure supervisors are better at making their reasoning more explicit. So let me have at it. I see a few of you are chomping at the bit. So Lava, Linda, and John, what do you think of those findings?
So the findings in the model that are developed by the authors, for me, it's clear. It's fine. It offers some insight into how variability plays into the development of competence. That's fine. What I would love to see, though, what I would have suggested for this manuscript, in order to make it a little more useful, a little more transferable, a little bit more in depth, is that the authors might have considered bringing in a theory and another theory. And I'm just going to, it's interesting because most of you have mentioned it already, but something as straightforward as the Dreyfus 5-stage model of skill acquisition, right? The Dreyfus and Dreyfus model explains how novices go from understanding and applying rules to then learning to bring situational variation into consideration as they move towards being competent, and then how experts handle a lot of variability and are able to make subtle and refined discriminations about what matters in that variability. So I could imagine bringing this theory of variability, so the generalization, the contrast generalization fusion, and bringing it together with the Dreyfus and Dreyfus model to think about how those three elements of the variability theory would look different across different stages of development. So the findings are fine. I'm not sure that variability by itself was the best fit. For contexts outside thrombosis, I think it works there. If we want to take it beyond, I think we're going to have to add a little bit more to make it more generalizable and useful broadly. Okay.
Linda?
I think it actually is applicable beyond. I mean, I'm like you guys, I'm in a part of medicine where it's very broad. And I can see applying this, as I said, to my learners, and specifically to trying to find out where their mindset is. And I don't mean growth mindset here. I mean where their mindset is as approach to as their approach to variability. And I actually like this variation theory. I agree with you, Lara. Linking it with something else that's maybe a little bit more well known in med ed could be helpful. But it's a novel theory for me. I like it.
John, last shot.
For all my complaints about the actual theory they produced at the end, which I'm taking to be figure 2, which I did not find helpful, which it's again clip art that it's see every previous rant about illustrations in HP. Finn. I liked it very much in the sense that they made some take home, some so what's around this, which, for all my desire for gray and nuance, every now and then I do like a little bit of a black and white, which is we should foster reflection. We should articulate out loud, and we should push learners into complexity where variation will be required. I was on a PhD committee. We did a series of experiments where we manipulated the social context of a number of written cases so that we saw the practice variation between novice and experienced physician about the application of very common clinical decision rules in medicine, and how learners were just stuck in one place when they were very novice, but experienced clinicians had no problems breaking all the rules because they understood that the experience of the patient was more than what this so-called best practice, best evidence would require. Having said all that, this is for a very nuanced context. A senior learner who already knows the black and white parts in a type of medicine where, and this is, Suraj, I'm sorry, but your diagnosis is there's clot, yes or no. And now do you get an injection or a pill? In which dose? That's really what it is, right?
And then the thrombosis people started Dacking John.
Yeah, right.
Or they at least left our podcast,
It's a very nuanced part of medicine and doesn't necessarily reflect broadly into the variability we're probably already seeing, which is every person who comes into the internal medicine ward with shortness of breath. Is it heart failure? Is it pneumonia? Is it COPD? Is it all of the above? None of the above?
Yeah.
It's just pulmonary hypertension.
Yes.
Where variability is seen and probably and tolerated with much more generosity in different practices, in different stages of training. So I think there's some cool stuff here. I think I'm going to apply some of the findings to my own practice.
Go, Linda.
2 comments. One is the one thing I do like about the diagram is that there's a little section called missed opportunities for learning. And that's something I think we can all learn from. And I don't remember what the second one was with all of this discussion. So go ahead.
It's okay. I forgot that you'd already talked. It's so good, hon.
Sorry.
It's all good. We'll make it cleaner. Okay, so it's a good time for a vote. We all agree this is an amazing paper. So let's put our numbers where our mouth is. Lara, Linda, John, methods?
I'm going to give this paper a 2 and a happy face.
Okay, do you want to explain?
It's just there were changes, there were adjustments in the methods to things that they didn't explain why. So I am left to try to figure that out on my own, and I just don't think that's a very that always gives me cause for pause, and I want to give them a happy face because I'm still their friend.
Too many causes for pause. Linda, what do you say?
Before we talk about the rating, I will say that, Lara, you're going to have a T-shirt that says, "Welcome to the Laraverse" on the front. And on the back, it'll say, "It gives me cause for pause." That's you must have used that phrase 6 times in this podcast. I'll give this a... See, trouble is, I don't think I understand what's missing in it because I'm not a methodological expert in this. So I'll give it a 3, but I'll say a 3 with a question mark after it, meaning that I have to go consult Lara.
What? We're getting more variations, more multiverse.
Everybody,
John?
We're not using hieroglyphics. There's no it's a checkbox.
There's no good reason why not. No, we can do what we want. There's a good
reason because we all agreed. Here's what I could give them a 3. I would give them
I wasn't on the podcast when that vote was taken.
Too late. You hitch your wagon to our train. This is what you get. We're going someplace. John. It might be hell in your mind, but we're going.
Having life choice regret.
I'm going to give it a 3. I would have given it a higher score if they would have said, listen, we are doing an analysis informed by the principles and practices of CGT, rather than saying we're doing CGT to produce a theory.
Yeah.
Because if they had done it that way, we could say, okay, here's what it feels like. Here's the experience of variation as a senior trainee. We could unpack all that, and we wouldn't have had to say, and by the way, now we're obliged to produce the theory that is the whole point of grounded theory. And so they would have got higher scores if they just would have reframed what they really wanted to do with their methods.
This is one of those papers where I really felt when I was reading the methods section that this was highly influenced by reviewers. I felt like, oh, you had to add that sentence in. Oh, you had to add that sentence in. Because some of them were kind of non sequiturs for me. We made member checking optional. I love that. I wonder if I can do that in the future. I'm going to make this element of standard methodology optional.
I'm going to make REB optional. That'll save you lots of time.
Right. That would be fabulous.
That would be awesome. Anyway, I thought there was a reviewer effect. I'm going to give this a 3. Okay, tell me about impact. You got variability theory. It's entering your life. Lara, Linda, John?
I'm going to give this paper a 2.
Wow.
I can't see myself using variability theory. It's so controlled, which is great, which is fantastic if you have the luxury of control. I just don't see it being something I can rely on in HPE.
I like it, and I can see using it. I give it a 4 because I think I can play with this, and particularly at the level of a senior resident fellow just about going into practice, to actually get them to think about variation and variability.
Okay, we have a PhD clinician divide. John, what do you say?
I'm going to give it a 4. And I think, Lara, the reason you're struggling with this is that you start from a position of the world is gray, and you can construct meaning and see in different ways. You have not experienced the passive-aggressive consult note back and forth, which is Dr. So-and-so erroneously gave the wrong antibiotic. And then back and forth, Dr. So-and-so erroneously missed the diagnosis, because we really believe there's a static, one size, one ring to rule them all, one perfect way that is played out every day and is being played out right now in hundreds and hundreds of health care settings. And so this idea of exposing our trainees to variation and understanding the nuance it's a really important message. And they introduced a theory to me. They introduced a theory that was new to me. And so, I use some of the stuff with all of the caveats of there are ways that they could have brushed this paper up a bit more.
Oh,
so what was your score, John?
He doesn't know.
4. I started with 4.
As a rebuttal, I think you're totally right. I live my
Your rebuttal is I'm totally right.
No.
I love it.
I take it back.
And cut.
Boom.
I think you raise a good point that I do start with the assumption that everything's a shade of gray. There's no right answer. I basically live that 98% of my life, unless the kids are asking for like something, and then no, I'm just right. But, and again, I also don't have a problem with this theory as it stands. I just think that thinking of it at these elements sequentially in a very controlled context is going to be really hard. So the theory has limitations.
All right. And on that note, I will add my vote. I think this is a brilliant theory to bring into medicine and health professions education. I think this is a high impact paper. I'm going to give it a 5.
You got to be kidding me.
And this is really cool. It's going to change the way I work.
It's about time it changed the way you work, so you were more like the norm, not outside of an outlier.
That's right. Being a rebel or incompetent, whichever it is that day. We'd like to hear from all of you. Hit us up on Google. Hit us up on our website. We want to know what you think, whether or not Lara just doesn't get it the clinician way, or is it that Lara knows something we don't know, and actually we're not seeing this clearly. This is a big controversy. We really need some of you to weigh in, try and clarify.
Maybe it's just Jason who's like pumping up his own article about being it all yibby, like, whatever.
Yibby
is part of the Lara verse. No, you only understand it after you get into the handshake. Yeah.
It sounds like another educational theory that involves John's rats. Just before we go, I do want to remind you all that we will be live at the Association for the Study of Medical Education in the UK this summer in July. So if you go to, did I say it wrong?
No, you're right. I was just wondering how you're going to pronounce the city name.
I can't remember the city name at the moment.
W-A-R-W-I-C-K.
Oh, Worcester.
Oh,
Worcester.
That's not Worcester. Jeez, you just totally made that up.
First of all, don't go to Worcester and don't use the sauce if you pronounce it that way.
Are you literate?
Stop.
It's in Warwick.
Okay.
Warwick.
Oh, sorry.
Warwick.
Oh,
It's a great British name of a city where you randomly pick letters and you just choose not to pronounce them.
I knew it was a W city in the UK.
We're doing great.
Yeah, it's fine. It's early. Day drinking. So let's just reboot that. For all of you who'd like to see us live, see us rant, understand why we're reacting to each other's crazy comments, see what John's wearing, you can see us live at the ASME conference in July in Warwick. And we'd love to have you there. John may actually wear a hat. Linda may wear it too. Who knows? Lara may wear a smile. Who knows? So we'd love to have you there. We'd love to have you debate with us. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. We hope we made you just slightly smarter. The podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Sörö. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for all you do. Take care.
All right.
We're amazing. We just ripped off three recordings in like an hour and a bit.
Actually, three and a half, in just over 2 hours.
Yeah.
Right? We're amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, I gotta go.
Okay, friends, I gotta fly to my next one. Bye.
Hey, thanks, everybody.